Good morning. It is super chilly. It's downright cold. But I'm here in the peace of the morning. No one is around. It's just me and my puppy dog. Thank you for being with me. See, a bunch of birds are flying in. Let me see if I can get us a little brighter. Wrong way. There we go. All right, and I'm going to continue. Let's see. Revising our basic assumptions about the underlying nature of human beings, from hostile to helpful, can open up new possibilities. If we begin by assuming the self-interest model of all human behavior, then an infant serves as a perfect example, as proof of that theory. At birth, infants appear to be programmed with only one thing on their minds: the gratification of their own needs. Food, physical comfort, and so on. But if we suspend that basic egoistic assumption. All right, let's try that again. But if we suspend that basic egoistic assumption, there's something wrong with that word. I'm sorry, it's early in the morning. I'll get it right as we jump rope through the book. All right. But if we suspend that basic egoistic assumption, a whole new picture begins to emerge. We could just as easily say that an infant is born programmed for only one thing: the capacity and purpose of bringing pleasure and joy to others. By just observing a healthy infant, it would be hard to deny the underlying gentle nature of human beings. And from this new vantage point, we could make a good case that the capacity to bring pleasure to another, the caregiver, is inborn. For example, in a newborn infant, the sense of smell is developed to perhaps only 5% of that of an adult, and the sense of taste is developed very little. But what does exist of these senses in the newborn is geared toward the smell and taste of breast milk. The act of nursing not only provides nutrients for the baby, it also serves to relieve tension in the breast. So we could say that the infant is born with an innate capacity to bring pleasure to the mother by relieving the tension in the breast. An infant is also biologically programmed to recognize and respond to faces. And there are few people who fail to find genuine pleasure in having a young baby gazing innocently into their eyes and smile. Some ethologists have formulated this into a theory, suggesting that when an infant smiles at the caregiver or looks directly into their eyes, the infant is following a deeply ingrained biological blueprint, instinctively releasing gentle, tender, caring behaviors from the caregiver, who is also obeying an equally compelling instinctual mandate. As more investigators strike out to objectively discover the nature of human beings, the notion of the infant as a little bundle of selfishness and eating and sleeping machine, as yielding to a vision of a being that comes into the world with an innate mechanism to please others, requiring only the proper environmental conditions to allow the underlying and natural seed of compassion to germinate and grow. Once we conclude that the basic nature of humanity is compassionate rather than aggressive, our relationship to the world around us changes immediately. Seeing others as basically compassionate instead of hostile and selfish helps us relax, trust, live at ease. It makes us happier. Next category, meditation on the purpose of life. Alrighty. As the Dalai Lama sat in the Arizona desert that week, exploring human nature and examining the human mind with the scrutiny of a scientist, one simple truth seemed to shine through and illuminate every decision. The purpose of our life is happiness. That simple statement can be used as a powerful tool in helping us navigate through life's daily problems. From that perspective, our task becomes one of discarding the things that lead to suffering and accumulating the things that lead to happiness. The method, the daily practice, involves gradually increasing our awareness and understanding of what truly leads to happiness and what doesn't. When life becomes too complicated and we feel overwhelmed, it's often useful just to stand back and remind ourselves of our overall purpose, our overall goal. When faced with a feeling of stagnation and confusion, it may be helpful to take an hour, an afternoon, or even several days to simply reflect on what it is that will truly bring us happiness, and then reset our priorities on the basis of that. This can put our lives back in proper context, allow a fresh perspective, and enable us to see which direction to take. From time to time, we are faced with pivotal decisions that can affect the entire course of our lives. We may decide, for instance, to get married, to have children, or to embark on a course of study, to become a lawyer, an artist, or even an electrician. The firm resolve to become happy, to learn about the factors that lead to happiness, and take positive steps to build a happier life can be just such a decision. Can be just such a decision. The turning toward happiness as a valid goal and the conscious decision to seek happiness in a systematic manner can profoundly change the rest of our lives. The Dalai Lama's understanding of the factors that ultimately lead to happiness is based on a lifetime of methodically observing his own mind, exploring the nature of the human condition, and investigating these things within a framework first established by the Buddha over 25 centuries ago. And from this background, the Dalai Lama has come to some definite conclusions about which activities and thoughts are most worthwhile. He summarized his beliefs in the following words that can be used as a meditation. Alrighty. Here we go. Excuse me. Sometimes when I meet old friends, it reminds me how quickly time passes, and it makes me wonder if we've utilized our time properly or not. Proper utilization of time is so important. While we have this body, and especially this amazing human brain, I think every minute is something precious. Our day-to-day existence is very much alive with hope, although there is no guarantee of our future. There is no guarantee that tomorrow, at this time, we will be here. But still, we are working for that purely on the basis of hope. So we need to make the best use of our time. I believe that the proper utilization of time is this: if you can, serve other people, other sentient beings. If you can, serve other people, other sentient beings. If not, at least refrain from harming them. I think that is the whole basis of my philosophy. So let us reflect on what is truly of value in life, what gives meaning to our lives, and set our priorities on the basis of that. The purpose of our life needs to be positive. We weren't born with the purpose of causing trouble, harming others. For our life to be of value, I think we must develop basic good human qualities: warmth, kindness, compassion. Then our life becomes meaningful and more peaceful, happier. All right, hang on, let me get a drink. It's also kind of cold. Going from slightly chilly to cold, which is not the same. My puppy is okay. He has all the covers on him. There's the vibrating in the back from that set of drums that's still back there. But I did move the tambourine so the dog doesn't hit it every time he walks by. Okay, so we continue. We, as in I. Human warmth and compassion, part 2. Okay, let's see if that's not too loud. We are in chapter 5, a new model for intimacy, or intimacy. Into me I see. Intimacy, yeah. Loneliness and connection. I entered the sitting room of the Dalai Lama's hotel suite, and he motioned for me to sit down. As tea was poured, he slipped off a pair of butterscotch-colored Rockports and settled comfortably into an oversized chair. "So?" he asked in a casual tone, but with an inflection that said he was ready for anything. He smiled, but remained silent, waiting. Moments before, while sitting in the hotel lobby waiting for our session to begin, I had absently picked up a copy of a local alternative newspaper that had been turned to the personals section. I had briefly scanned the densely packed ads, page after page, of people searching, desperately hoping to connect with another human being. Still thinking about those ads as I sat down to begin my meeting with the Dalai Lama, I suddenly decided to set aside my list of prepared questions and asked, "Do you ever get lonely?" "No," he said simply. I was unprepared for this response. I assumed that his response would be along the lines of, "Oh, of course, every once in a while, everyone feels some loneliness." Then I was planning on asking him how he deals with loneliness. I never expected to confront anyone who never felt lonely. "No?" I asked again, incredulous. "No. What do you attribute that to?" And he thought for a moment. I think one factor is that I look at any human being from a more positive angle. I try to look for their positive aspects. This attitude immediately creates a feeling of affinity, a kind of connectedness. And it may partly be because on my part, there is less apprehension, less fear, that if I act in a certain way, maybe the person will lose respect or think that I am strange. So because that kind of fear and apprehension is normally absent, there is a kind of openness. I think it's the main factor. Riding on a boat, folks. Hang on. Trying to not miss that sun because it's over there. I do have the car running, so I could just move the whole damn car, but I'm playing tough today. There we go. Fine. I'll move the car. I don't want to miss the sun. I mean, that's why I'm here. I can see it. But you, my friends, may have to miss it. I do not adjust my situation here. There it comes. Here comes the sun. Okay. All right, warmed up. Let's go on. Okay. No? I asked again, incredulous. No. What do you attribute that to? He thought for a moment. I think one factor is that I look at any human being from a more positive angle. I try to look for their positive aspects. This attitude immediately creates a feeling of affinity and a kind of connectedness. And it may be partly because on my part, there is less apprehension, less fear, that if I act in a certain way, maybe the person will lose respect or think that I am strange. So because that kind of fear and apprehension is normally absent, there is a kind of openness. I think it's the main factor. Struggling to comprehend the scope and difficulty of adopting such an attitude, I asked, but how would you suggest that a person achieve the ability to feel that comfortable with people, not have that fear or apprehension of being disliked or judged by other people? Are there specific methods that an average person could use to develop this attitude? My basic belief is that you first need to realize the usefulness of compassion, he said with a tone of conviction. That's the key factor. Once you accept the fact that compassion is not something childish or sentimental, once you realize that compassion is something really worthwhile, realize its deeper value, then you immediately develop an attraction toward it, a willingness to cultivate it. And once you encourage the thought of compassion in your mind, once that thought becomes active, then your attitude toward others changes automatically. If you approach others with the thought of compassion, that will automatically reduce fear and allow an openness with the other people. It creates a positive, friendly atmosphere. With that attitude, you can approach a relationship in which you, yourself, initially create the possibility of receiving affection or a positive response from the other person. And with that attitude, even if the other person is unfriendly or does not respond to you in a positive way, then at least you've approached the person with a feeling of openness that gives you a certain flexibility and the freedom to change your approach as needed. There's the sun. Good morning. All the birds are quiet, just flying around eating. Guess when it's cold, your voice doesn't work so good if you're a bird. I don't know. I just made that up. I'm guessing. I don't know why they're being quiet. They're seagulls, or they're river gulls, as I like to call them when I remember. They're just not making a lot of noise. Usually they're just, if you ask me, seagulls should have been called harpies because they make so much noise. Always harpying. But I know the difference. All right, let's continue before I forget where we're at. Okay. And once you encourage the thought of compassion in your mind, once the thought becomes active, when your attitude towards others changes automatically. Okay, let me get a drink. I'm cold. I'm inappropriately clothed up. Again, if you could see my pups, he is wearing all my jackets. And he's so precious. Brings me joy. Brings me happiness. Okay. If you approach others with a thought of compassion, that will automatically reduce fear and allow an openness with other people. It creates a positive, friendly atmosphere. With that attitude, you can approach a relationship in which you, yourself, initially create the possibility of receiving affection or a positive response from the other person. And with that attitude, even if the other person is unfriendly or doesn't respond to you in a positive way, then at least you've approached the person with a feeling of openness that gives you a certain flexibility and the freedom to change your approach as needed. That kind of openness at least allows the possibility of having a meaningful conversation with them, but without the attitude of compassion. If you are feeling closed, irritated, or indifferent, then you can even be approached by your best friend and you will just feel uncomfortable. I think that in many cases people tend to expect the other person to respond to them in a positive way first, rather than taking the initiative themselves to create that possibility. I feel that's wrong. It leads to problems and can act as a barrier that just serves to promote a feeling of isolation from others. So if you wish to overcome that feeling of isolation and loneliness, I think that your underlying attitude makes a tremendous difference. And approaching others with the thought of compassion in your mind is the best way to do this. There we go. Looks great. My surprise about the Dalai Lama's claim that he was never lonely was in direct proportion to my belief in the pervasiveness of loneliness in our society. Okay. My surprise about the Dalai Lama's claim that he was never lonely was in direct proportion to my belief in the pervasiveness of loneliness in our society. This belief wasn't born merely from an impressionistic sense of my own loneliness, or the thread of loneliness that seemed to run as an underlying theme throughout the fabric of my psychiatric practice. In the past 20 years, psychologists have begun to study loneliness in a scientific manner, conducting a fair number of surveys and studies on the subject. One of the most striking findings of these studies is that virtually all people report that they do experience loneliness, either currently or in the past. In one large survey, 1/4 of U.S. adults reported that they had felt extremely lonely at least once within the previous 2 weeks. Although we often think of chronic loneliness as an affliction, particularly widespread among the elderly, isolated in empty apartments or in the back wards of nursing homes, research suggests that teenagers and young adults are just as likely to report they are lonely as the elderly. Because of the widespread occurrence of loneliness, investigators have begun to examine the complex variables that may contribute to loneliness. For instance, they have found that lonely individuals often have problems with self-disclosure, have difficulty communicating with others, are poor listeners, and lack certain social skills, such as picking up conversational cues, like knowing when to nod, to respond appropriately, or to remain silent. This research suggests that one strategy for overcoming loneliness would be to work on improving these social skills. The Dalai Lama's strategy, however, seemed to bypass working on social skills or external behaviors in favor of an approach that cut directly to the heart, realizing the value of compassion and then cultivating it. Despite my initial surprise as I listened to him speak with such conviction, I came to firmly believe that he was never lonely, and there was evidence to support his claim. Often enough, I had witnessed his first interaction with a stranger, which was invariably positive. It started to become clear that these positive interactions were not accidental or simply the result of a naturally friendly personality. I sensed that he had spent a great deal of time thinking about the importance of compassion, carefully cultivating it, and using it to enrich and soften the ground of his everyday experience, making that soil fertile and receptive to positive interactions with others, a method that can, in fact, be used by anyone who suffers from loneliness. Next mini section, dependence on others versus self-reliance. All right, looks clear. Within all beings, there is the seed of perfection. However, compassion is required in order to activate that seed, which is inherent in our hearts and minds. With this, the Dalai Lama introduced the topic of compassion to a hushed assembly, addressing an audience of 1,500 people, counting among them a fair proportion of dedicated students of Buddhism. He then began to discuss the Buddhist doctrine of the field of merit. In the Buddhist sense, merit is described as positive imprints on one's mind or mental continuum that occur as a result of positive actions. Positive imprints that occur because of positive actions. The Dalai Lama explained that a field of merit is a source or foundation from which a person can accumulate merit. According to Buddhist theory, it is a person's stores of merit that determine favorable conditions for one's future rebirths. He explained that Buddhist doctrine specifies two fields of merit: the field of the Buddhas and the field of other sentient beings. One method of accumulating merit involves generating respect, faith, and confidence in the Buddhas, the enlightened beings. The other method involves practicing actions like kindness, generosity, tolerance, and so on, and conscious restraint from negative actions like killing, stealing, and lying. That second method of acquiring merit requires interaction with other people rather than interaction with the Buddhas. On that basis, the Dalai Lama pointed out other people can be of great help to us in accumulating merit. The Dalai Lama's description of other people as a field of merit had a beautiful, lyrical quality to it that seemed to lend itself to a richness of imagery. His lucid reasoning and the conviction behind his words combined to give special power and impact to his talk that afternoon. As I looked around the room, I could see that many members of the audience were visibly moved. I, myself, was less enthralled. As a result of our earlier conversations, I was in the rudimentary stage of appreciating the profound importance of compassion. Yet I was still heavily influenced by years of rational, scientific conditioning that made me regard any talk of kindness and compassion as being a bit too sentimental for my taste. As he spoke, my mind began to wander. I started furtively. Sometimes I look away and then I look back like I want to sneak up on it. I might get it right. Like, look away. Okay, look back. Furtively. There we go. I started furtively looking around the room, searching for famous, interesting, or familiar faces. Having eaten a big meal just before the talk, I started to get sleepy. I drifted in and out. At one point in the talk, my mind tuned in to hear him say, ... The other day, I spoke about the factors necessary to enjoy a happy and joyful life. Factors such as good health, material goods, friends, and so on. Excuse me. If you closely investigate, you'll find that all of these depend on other people. To maintain good health, you rely on medicines made by others and healthcare provided by others. If you examine all of the material facilities that you use for the enjoyment of life, you'll find that there are hardly any of these material objects that have had no connection with other people. If you think carefully, you'll see that all of these goods come into being as a result of the efforts of many people, either directly or indirectly. Many people are involved in making those things possible. Needless to say, when we're talking about good friends and companions as being another necessary factor for a happy life, we are talking about interaction with other sentient beings, other human beings. So you can see that all of these factors are inextricably linked with other people's efforts and cooperation. Others are indispensable. So despite the fact that the process of relating to others might involve hardships, quarrels, and cursing, we have to try to maintain an attitude of friendship and warmth in order to lead a way of life in which there is enough interaction with other people to enjoy a happy life. As he spoke, I felt an instinctive resistance. Although I've always valued and enjoyed my friends and family, I've considered myself to be an independent person, self-reliant. Prided myself on this quality, in fact. Secretly, I've tended to regard overly dependent people with a kind of contempt, a sign of weakness. Yet that afternoon, as I listened to the Dalai Lama, something happened. As our dependence on others was not my favorite topic, my mind started to wander again, and I found myself absently removing a loose thread from my shirt sleeve, tuning in for a moment. I listened as he mentioned the many people who are involved in making all our material possessions. As he said this, I began to think about how many people were involved in making my shirt. I started by imagining the farmer who grew the cotton, next the salesperson who sold the farmer the tractor to plow the field, then, for that matter, the hundred or even thousands of people involved in manufacturing that tractor, including the people who mined the ore to make the metal for each part of the tractor, and all the designers of the tractor. Then, of course, the people who processed the cotton, the people who wove the cotton, and the people who cut, dyed, and sewed the cloth, the cargo workers and the truck drivers who delivered the shirt to the store, and the salesperson who sold the shirt to me. It occurred to me that virtually every aspect of my life came about as the results of others' efforts. My precious self-reliance was a complete illusion, a fantasy. As this realization dawned on me, I was overcome with a profound sense of the interconnectedness and interdependence of all beings. I felt a softening, something I don't know. It made me want to cry. Really? That's my broken spider arm, refusing to be nice to me. Come on, baby. Don't be like that. If I move it, then that rogue arm just like, I don't know, does something. Okay. And I'm back. Intimacy, or intimacy, is that how they're saying it? Just regular intimacy, but that's a lot of deep meanings. Here we go. Here I go. Our need for other people is paradoxical. That word is in every book I read. It doesn't even matter which book. Our need for other people is paradoxical. At the same time that our culture is caught up in the celebration of fierce independence, we also yearn for intimacy and connectedness with a special loved one. We focus all our energy on finding the right person who we hope will heal our loneliness, yet prop up our illusion that we are still independent. Though this connection is difficult to achieve with even one person, I would find out that the Dalai Lama is capable of and recommends maintaining closeness with as many people as possible. In fact, his aim is to connect with everyone. Meeting with him in his hotel suite in Arizona late one afternoon, I began. In your public talk yesterday afternoon, you spoke of the importance of others, describing them as a field of merit. But in examining our relationship with others, there are really so many different ways in which we can relate to one another. Different kinds of relationships. That's very true, said the Dalai Lama. For instance, there's a certain type of relationship that's highly valued in the West, I observed. That is a relationship that's characterized by a deep level of intimacy between two people, having one special person with whom you can share your deepest feelings, fears, and so on. People feel that unless they have a relationship of this kind, that there is something missing in their lives. In fact, Western therapy often seeks to help people learn how to develop that type of intimate relationship. Yes, I believe that kind of intimacy can be seen as something positive, said the Dalai Lama. I think if someone is deprived of that kind of intimacy, then it can lead to problems. I'm just wondering then, I continued, when you were growing up in Tibet, you were not only considered to be like a king, but you were also considered to be a deity. I assume that people were in awe of you, perhaps even a bit nervous or frightened to be in your presence. Didn't that create a certain emotional distance from others? A feeling of isolation? Also being separated from your family, being raised as a monk from an early age, and as a monk never marrying and so on. Didn't all these things contribute to a feeling of separation from others? Do you even feel that you missed out on do you ever feel that you missed out on developing a deeper level of personal intimacy with others? Or with one special person, such as a spouse? And without hesitation, he replied, no, I never felt a lack of intimacy. Of course, my father passed away many years ago, but I felt quite close to my mother, my teachers, my tutors, and others. And with many of these people, I could share my deepest feelings, fears, and concerns. When I was in Tibet on state occasions and at public events, there was a certain formality, a certain protocol was observed, but that wasn't always the case. At other times, for example, I used to spend time in the kitchen, and I became quite close with some of the kitchen staff, and we could joke or gossip or share things, and it would be quite relaxed, without that sense of formality or distance. So when I was in Tibet, or since I've become a refugee, I've never felt a lack of people with whom I can share things. I think a lot of this has to do with my nature. It is easy for me to share things with others. I'm just not good at keeping secrets. He laughed. Of course, sometimes this can be a negative trait. For example, there may be some discussion, as in the Kashag, which is the cabinet of the Tibetan government in exile, about confidential things, and then I immediately discuss these things with others. But on a personal level, being open and sharing things can be very useful. Because of this nature, I can make friends more easily. And it's not just a matter of knowing people and having a superficial exchange, but of really sharing my deepest problems and suffering. And it's the same thing when I hear good news. I immediately share it with others. So I feel a sense of intimacy and connection with my friends. Of course, it's sometimes easier for me to establish a connection with others because they're often very happy to share their suffering or joy with the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He laughed again, making light of his title. Anyway, I feel this sense of connection, of sharing with many people. For instance, in the past, if I felt disappointed or unhappy with Tibetan governmental policies, or I was concerned with other problems, even the threat of Chinese invasion, then I would return to my rooms and share this with the person who sweeps the floor. From one point of view, it may seem quite silly to some that the Dalai Lama, the head of the Tibetan government, facing some international or national problems, would share them with a sweeper. He laughed once again, but personally I feel it is very helpful because then the other person participates and we can face the problem or the suffering together. Expanding our definition of intimacy. Okay, a couple pages left. Virtually all researchers in the field of human relationships agree that intimacy is central to our existence. The influential British analyst John Bowlby wrote that intimate attachments to other human beings are the hub around which a person's life revolves. From these intimate attachments, a person draws his strength and enjoyment of life, and through what he contributes, he gives strength and enjoyment to others. These are matters about which current science and traditional wisdom are at one. It is clear that intimacy promotes both physical and psychological well-being. In looking at the health benefits of intimate relationships, medical researchers have found that people who have close friendships, people whom they can turn to for affirmation, empathy, and affection, are more likely to survive health challenges such as heart attacks and major surgery, and are less likely to develop diseases such as cancer and respiratory infections. For example, one study of over 1,000 heart patients at Duke University Medical Center found that those who lacked a spouse or close confidant were 3 times more likely to die within 5 years of the diagnosis of heart disease as those who were married or had a close friend. Another study of thousands of residents in Alameda County, California, over a 9-year period, showed that those with more social support and intimate relationships had lower death rates overall and lower rates of cancer. And a study at the University of Nebraska School of Medicine of several hundred elderly people found that those with an intimate relationship had better immune function and lower cholesterol levels. Wait just a second. Whew, a little thirsty there. Over the course of the past several years, there have been at least a half dozen massive investigations conducted by a number of different researchers looking at the relationship between intimacy and health. After interviewing thousands of people, the various investigators all seem to have reached the same conclusion. Close relationships do, in fact, promote health. All right, let's see if we can get this done. Intimacy is equally as important in maintaining good emotional health The analyst and social philosopher Enrique Fromm claimed that humankind's most basic fear is the threat of being separated from other humans. He believed that the experience of separateness, first encountered in infancy, is the source of all anxiety in human life. John Bowlby agreed, citing a good deal of experimental evidence and research to support the idea that separation from one's caregivers, usually the mother or father, during the latter part of the first year of life inevitably creates fear and sadness in babies. He felt that separation and interpersonal loss are at the very roots of the human experiences of fear, sadness, and sorrow. So, given the vital importance of intimacy, how do we set about achieving intimacy in our daily lives? Following the Dalai Lama's approach outlined in the last section, it would seem reasonable to begin with learning, with understanding what intimacy is, seeking a working definition and model of intimacy, and looking to science for the answer. However, it seems that despite the universal agreement among researchers about the importance of intimacy, that seems to be where the agreement ends. Perhaps the most striking feature of even a cursory view Perhaps the most striking feature of even a cursory review of the various studies on intimacy is the wide diversity the wide diversity of definitions and theories about exactly what intimacy is. At the most concrete end of the spectrum is the author Desmond Morris, who writes about intimacy from the perspective of a zoologist trained in ethology. In his book, Intimate Behavior, Morris defines intimacy. And here's how he defines that. To be intimate means to be close. In my terms, the act of intimacy occurs whenever two individuals come into bodily contact. After defining intimacy in terms of purely physical contact, he then goes on to explore the countless ways in which humans come into physical contact with one another, from a simple pat on the back to the most erotic sexual embrace. He sees touch as the vehicle through which we comfort one another and are comforted, via hugs or clasps of the hand, and when those avenues are not available to us, more indirect means of physical contact, such as a manicure. He even theorizes that the physical contacts we have with objects in our environment, from cigarettes to jewelry to waterbeds, act as substitutes for intimacy. Most investigators are not so concrete in their definitions of intimacy, agreeing that intimacy is more than just physical closeness. Looking at the root of the word intimacy from the Latin intima, meaning inner or innermost, they most often subscribe to a broader definition, such as the one offered by Dr. Dan McAdams, author of several books on the subject of intimacy. Here's his little quote. The desire for intimacy is the desire to share one's innermost self with another. But definitions of intimacy do not stop there. On the opposite end of the spectrum, from Desmond Morris, stand experts such as the father-son psychiatric team, Doctors Thomas Patrick Malone and Patrick Thomas Malone. In their book, titled The Art of Intimacy, they define intimacy as the experience of connectivity. Their understanding of intimacy begins with a thorough examination of our connectivity with other people. But they do not, however, limit their concept of intimacy to human relationships. Their definition is so broad, in fact, that it includes our relationships with inanimate objects like trees, stars, and even space. Concepts of the most ideal form of intimacy also vary throughout the world and history. The romantic notion of that one special person with whom we have a passionate, intimate relationship is a product of our time and culture. But this model of intimacy is not universally accepted among other cultures. For instance, the Japanese seem to rely more on friendships to gain intimacy, whereas Americans seek it more in romantic relationships with a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or a spouse. In noting this, some researchers have suggested that Asians, who tend to be less focused on personal feelings, such as passion, and are more concerned with the practical aspects of social attachments, appear less vulnerable to the kind of disillusionment that leads to the crumbling of relationships. In addition to variations among cultures, concepts of intimacy have also dramatically changed over time. In colonial America, the level of physical intimacy and proximity was generally greater than it is today. A family, and even strangers, shared close spaces and slept together in one room, and used a common room for bathing, eating, and sleeping. Yet the customary level of communication among spouses was quite formal by today's standards, not much different from the way acquaintances or neighbors spoke to one another. Only a century later, love and marriage became highly romanticized, and intimate self-disclosure was expected to be an ingredient in any loving partnership. Ideas of what is considered to be private and intimate behavior have also changed over time. In 16th century Germany, for instance, a new husband and wife were expected to consummate their marriage on a bed carried by witnesses who would validate the marriage. How people express their emotions has also changed. In the Middle Ages, it was considered normal to publicly express a wide range of feelings with great intensity and directness: joy, rage, fear, piety, and even pleasure at torturing and killing enemies. Extremes of hysterical laughter, passionate weeping, and violent rage were expressed much more than would be accepted in our society. But the commonplace expression of emotions and feelings in that society ruled out the concept of emotional intimacy. If one is to display all emotions openly and indiscriminately, then there are no private feelings left to express to a special few. Clearly, the notion we take for granted about intimacy are not universal. They change over time and are often shaped by economic, social, and cultural conditions. And it is easy to become confused by the variety of different contemporary Western definitions of intimacy, with manifestations ranging from a haircut to our relationship with Neptune's moons. So where does this leave us in our quest to understand what intimacy is? I think that the implication is clear. There is an incredible diversity among human lives, infinite variations among people with respect to how they can experience a sense of closeness. This realization alone offers us a great opportunity. It means that at this very moment, we have vast resources of intimacy available to us. Intimacy is all around us. Today, so many of us are oppressed by a feeling of something missing in our lives, intensely suffering from a lack of intimacy. This is particularly true when we go through the inevitable periods in our life when we're not involved in a romantic relationship, or when the passion wanes from a relationship. There is a widespread notion in our culture that deep intimacy is best achieved within the context of a passionate romantic relationship. That special someone who we set apart from all others. This can be a profoundly limiting viewpoint, cutting us off from other potential sources of intimacy and the cause of much misery and unhappiness when that special someone isn't there. But we have within our power the means to avoid this. We need only courageously expand our concept of intimacy to include all the other forms that surround us on a daily basis. By broadening our definition of intimacy, we open ourselves to discovering many new and equally satisfying ways of connecting with others. This brings us back to my initial discussion of loneliness with the Dalai Lama, a discussion triggered by a chance perusal of the personals section of a local newspaper. It makes me wonder. At the very moment that those people were composing their ads, struggling to find just the right words that would bring romance into their lives and end the loneliness, how many of those people were already surrounded by friends, family, or acquaintances? Relationships that could easily be cultivated into genuine and deeply satisfying, intimate relationships. Many, I would guess. If what we seek in life is happiness, and intimacy is an important ingredient of a happier life, then it clearly makes sense to conduct our lives on the basis of a model of intimacy that includes as many forms of connection with others as possible. The Dalai Lama's model of intimacy is based on a willingness to open ourselves to many others, to family, friends, and even strangers, forming genuine and deep bonds based on our common humanity. That is page 84. A little peeky-poo of this book here. That's what I'm reading you. Hope that was clear. I'm cold and I'm thirsty. Thank you for being with me. We are a third of the way through this happiness book. I think this is the second video, maybe third video. So I'm thinking if I'm blessed by the universe, then I'll get to finish reading it and it won't take too many videos, because I see that my videos are filling up fast. I appreciate you. Hit like if you're enjoying any of this so that I can get a clue. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for being with me.